Designated Survivor Episode 2, The First Day. Now, of course, coming off of the premiere, there's a lot of craziness going into this series, and going into the second episode, it got even crazier. We have this newly, assigned president who, like, the start of the episode, it's not just the people inside the White House. It's just all over the freaking news. Like, he said this speech and it was good, but nobody really gives a crap. And is he qualified? Probably not. That's like the whole beginning. Is everyone is just like, great speech, not good enough. He's not qualified. Should we have someone else? Should he, step down or whatever? So that's the start of the episode, is where he has to deal with that. And of course it goes through and we see, I don't know if it'll get bigger than this episode as far as someone not giving a crap that he's president, but the governor that they did, the governor of Michigan, man, that guy, I hated that guy. He's like, you're not my president and stuff, and it's like, I gotta help, defend my people and everything. And that was really interesting because they had it with, it's some real serious stuff where, it's like people being targeted based on how they look and stuff, which is a realistic thing. Like, that does happen, of course. And, they do it early on in the episode with Cal Penn's character. I really don't know, like, anybody's names just yet for the show. But, he just leaves his house, and, like, his neighbor, looks at him and, like, closes the door, and then the cops pull up on him, and it's like, who are you, and where do you live, and where do you work, and stuff like that. And then the whole thing with Dearborn, Michigan, that was interesting because I live near Dearborn, and I went to school in Dearborn because I went to U of M Dearborn. So it was interesting. I was like, man, that's like super close to home for me, and that's, like the guy said, is like that's the, the population there, and just the way everyone would freak out and how everyone was freaking out, specifically the cops in that situation where they're targeting these people just because of the way they look or their beliefs and stuff like that. It's like, oh, they, it was just like the super generic, typical racist type stuff where it's like, oh, because they look this way or they believe in this, it has to be directly tied to this. And it's like, it was just insane, like, how all that stuff was playing out. And, we have, this guy who's the newly appointed president, and he has to deal with this dude who won't even pick up the phone and talk to him because he's like, you're not my president and I do what I want. And, he's talking about being like the highest authority and stuff like that. And it's not like he can leave and be like, hey, I'm going to go, to Dearborn, Michigan, or, wherever the actual governor is supposed to be, and deal with this dude and tell him basically shut up and do as I say because I'm the president. He has to stay where he is. He can't just leave and go to a different part of the country. And it was just interesting to watch. It's like he has to like talk with lawyers and stuff like that. And I was like, man, I wouldn't think the president would ever have to do that. It's like, hey, send this person down here, basically, hit him in the head and tell him shut up and do as I say. That's what I think when I think of the president. Like, you do as I command. Ultimately, when it comes down to it, you do as the president commands. But he has to like talk with lawyers and get a consensus on what he should do. What appears to be too strong of a movement in such a delicate situation. What appears to be too weak of a solution in such a delicate situation. And it's really crazy. That was a funny scene too when he was talking with the lawyers. He was like, is there anything you guys can agree on? And they still don't have the same answer. I was like, that was actually really funny. But he has to go through dealing with this guy, and then he decides that, he wants to go and actually see, see the site and see exactly what's happening, and he wants to thank the first responders and stuff. And so he goes and he does, the presidential speech and stuff, and he kind of proves to people throughout the episode, which is kind of what I liked about the character, because he really is just like a dude where it's like, this isn't a photo op, I'm genuinely trying to thank these people. And he gets there and he doesn't have like steely resolve because he's president. He's like, holy crap, like this is devastating to actually be in that situation. And he froze for a little bit, and he's with his wife, and the security guard like tries to call him over, and his wife has to kind of like pull on his arm and say like, hey, they want you, because he's kind of frozen in place. And I was like, I like this because that's kind of a normal situation. Like you'd be shocked, like what happened, and maybe you see those clips and glimpses on the news, stuff like that. But to actually head down there and see the destruction and the debris, and see all these people working on cleaning up, a building that literally held, when it happened, all these cabinet members from both parties. And it was just a crazy situation. It's like, wow, that's just, something to see, So he froze, and I thought that was fairly realistic, and he does try to help them, and he gives his own little speech. And of course, during that time, is when the video comes out of the young boy getting beat up by the cops. And so I like the way they did that too. I was like, all right, it makes a lot of sense. He's not a typical president where it's like, oh, I'm not answering questions or whatever. He's like, no, I didn't hear the question, because he was going to try to, talk about it. And then the random dude, I don't know what his deal was, but this random dude is running, with his hand in his pocket. He's like, hey, stop and all this stuff. And it's like, I know that he had a phone, but it's like, you don't do that. You don't do that, period, because it's the president. Like, that's, they gotta, those people are supposed to, like, dive in front of the president to sacrifice themselves, the Secret Service. So, I don't know if that's actually real or not, but ultimately. So, you have people that do that for a living, pre-super terrorist attack, and then you want to run up in the middle of, this insane disaster moment. You want to run up with your hand just in your pocket like you're about to pull out a gun. And it was just crazy. I was like, yeah, that logically escalated during that situation, because he was just trying to talk to the reporter like, hey, I don't know about this situation. He was legitimately trying to figure it out. And the only reason all that stuff, went chaotic was because that random dude was walking, and they're like, hey, the guy was like, it must have a gun because he's not freaking listening. But of course, the guy, one of the guys behind the little guard railing, when after they finally tackled the dude, it's like, it's a phone. But it's like, why in the world would you be walking up like that? It's such a stupid thing. And of course, they have the news thing where it's like, his first kind of outing as president to go to this memorial, which will be a memorial at some point, to go to this location. It became a disaster and stuff like that. And it's like, man, all people are gonna see is like, wow, he sucks as a president. It was already a disaster, but it's like this random guy is the reason it was a disaster, because he would have had that situation dealt with very differently, because he would have been talking with the reporter and kind of explaining to people that this isn't how he wants to do things. So it goes through, and of course he ends up talking with the governor. Finally, the guy sits down and all that crap, and I like the way it was played. He's like, you arrested, I think he said you had 2 undercover agents or whatever. So you're, basically releasing all these people. I can't tell you what's happening because it's classified and stuff like that. So you're going to release everyone. He kind of did it, do as I command sort of thing. So I liked how that played out. And of course, they're like, do you want us to contact, the agents and stuff like that, their handlers or something? And he's like, there weren't any agents, which I figured there weren't. I was like, when he said that, I was like, I don't know if this is true or not. And he's like, there weren't any agents. I just said that so you listen, like, oh, you're screwing up this, and this, and it's not obstruction of justice. Or it may have been obstruction. It was something where it's like you're screwing up, a big investigation because you want to just profile people and have a ton of people get arrested just based on how they look. So I love that. I was like, that was a cool way to play it. Diplomatic but serious at the same time. Just like in the premiere, when he dealt with the guy who had the ships and everything, or it was like, he was super nice to him. He was like, but you have 3 hours or basically you're destroyed. And that was his thing. So they kind of did that again, which I really enjoy those elements where it's like he's very serious about stuff, but he tries to do it in the nicest way possible, which he has to. He's, president. He doesn't want to do stuff where it's like, I'm kind of sure about this, or this might be the person. He doesn't want to name, the terrorist group because it's like, oh, we're, I think they were saying we're 75% sure. And he's like, come back when you're more sure. It's like, how much percent? It's like 25. You need to be 100% sure before any of this stuff happens. And that's how we kind of get a lot of the FBI side of this episode, where they have this bomb, and it's like, okay, so this thing may not have been meant to go off because, what if whoever did this was smarter than we think? It's meant to be this bomb. It's like, oh, this is typically linked to this terrorist group, but for whatever reason, there's certain elements where it's like, clearly this bomb was gutted in some way, shape, or form, but, they kind of just go with, well, it's just human error, most likely. So it was pretty interesting. It's like, okay, they're throwing out human error is the most likely possibility for why it didn't go off. And, we have our FBI agent where she's like, all right, I feel like the president needs to know some theories, but of course the director, he's like, I can't go to this guy with theories. Like, he's the brand new president, and I believe he was the one that mentioned this, that he was like 11th in line or whatever, and he's like, he's kind of going through it right now. I can't come to him with theories with all the chaos he's already going through. So it's like, if you have this theory, come to me with it when it's true, when it's factual, you have proof on it. So I thought that was interesting. He's not trying to dismiss or anything. It's just like, I can't give this guy theories in the middle of all this insane chaos. So I kind of like that. I was like, he wasn't a dick about it. It's just like, I can't do that because it's already chaotic enough. I need proof. And, if you get it, then absolutely I'll take it straight to him. But at this point, it's just a theory that, it could be a different group trying to make it look like another terrorist group. But we don't know that for sure. So, of course, that's going to be our FBI storyline throughout the season, which I'm kind of excited to see that, because it's just like, is it going to end up being an inside job sort of deal, something crazy like that, or is it going to be an actual terrorist group? There are a lot of possibilities, a lot of ways they can go with this, but I'm excited to see where they take it. It was pretty fun. It was definitely a fun episode. We also met the Republican designated survivor in this episode, and she seems to be really on board with helping him out. And they have the scene at the end of the episode where she's kind of looking up information on him. So, I don't know if that means anything bad or what the deal is with that, but I was like, okay. Whenever somebody's looking up information on a TV show, I always assume it's something villainous, because it's like, what do you need extra information for? So every time I see that in the TV show, it's like, I don't know if this is a good sign or a bad sign. So I'm just going to assume it's bad, and she might be planning something. I don't know if she and the general will end up coming together at some point, like, hey, you don't want this guy here, I don't want this guy here. They mentioned that she has way more experience, but, of course, because it was a Democrat in office, that's why Kirkman is the one who, took over. So that could be something that comes into play, where this general, who is already basically talking about killing them, he can come into play, and it's like, okay, well, instead of doing that, we just let this woman take over, even though it would switch parties. I don't know how that, I'm sure there's some actual rule in law or whatever. But it was, I don't know, it was like, alright, she's looking up this information. They say it early on, like, so she basically has, like, way more experience than our current president. It's like, yep, she definitely does. But we'll have to see how all that stuff plays out. He does have to appoint a ton of people to cabinet. Like, he still doesn't have a government. He doesn't even have a chief of staff. He has to find his people. Like, the governor even assumed that, like, the one dude was chief of staff. And he was like, you're chief of staff. You need to talk with him. And he's like, actually, I'm not. And he hasn't appointed one. And so that just made the general even madder. He's like, well, that's just another trigger he can't pull. He doesn't know, what should be done. So the general just flat out hates him, I know. But I like this dynamic. He has to pick out the right people. I don't know how the government works. At this point, they say it a bunch. It's like, there's kind of no government right now. Everybody died. There's no, they say there's no Supreme Court, this, and this. So everything's so chaotic. It's like, well, I don't know if there are rules against that, but maybe he would appoint her to chief of staff. I mean, she knows so much. Or maybe vice president even. I don't even know how that whole thing works. Because I was surprised when it's like, oh, you're chief of staff. That's not vice president, though. Or it could be, unless it's two names and I just never knew that. But, he has to appoint all these different people. And I guess, vice president is... There are certain things, where it's like, sometimes you just have this and this. And you have this title, but you're kind of just in a weird in-between zone where you don't actually do too much, because you got the person at the top and then the people way under you. So maybe that's why they're talking about chief of staff. Like I said, unless that is vice president, and I just never knew that those names were, synonymous with each other. But he has to pick an entire cabinet, and that's kind of what they're going through in this episode. And I'm excited to see where it goes. He has to make these crazy decisions. We have, Kal Penn's character, who's the writer. I said that in my last review. I don't know if people know the actor by name. But the guy who, was stopped by the police and everything. I'm curious what his role is going to be. I was thinking, for a second, during the scene where it's just the two of them, I thought he was going to appoint him as chief of staff for a second. Because it's like, well, he was thrown in as, this random dude who was about to get fired for president. The guy who writes for the president, I don't know if that's even that crazy to appoint him to chief of staff. Is it really that big of a leap considering what just happened? So that's what I was thinking when he's like, hey, can you come with me for a second? But that didn't end up happening. So that's just like he's got his couple of people. He's got well, not necessarily the chief of staff, but he's got his right hand man. He has his speechwriter, and then he has his friend who was like his assistant or like was basically like right under him before he ended up being president. So it's obviously like the three of them. They're gonna have some role. I don't know if he'll make them cabinet members or what the deal is gonna be, but it's obvious they're like the main characters of the show. So they're gonna have some important role. And we got to see a little bit from his wife in this episode, which I enjoyed. When they were first coming back from the event, and she was asking all these questions, and it was like, who is the boy, what's his name, stuff like that, what's his situation right now. And I was like, that's kind of cool. She's getting all this extra information, and it kind of just showed a little bit of her leadership skills, where it's like, she's the first lady, which I can't remember if that was in this episode or the last one where they mentioned that, but I thought that was kind of cool. I was like, okay, this is her having her little moment, at least like early on in the series. This is one of her just little moments where it's like she's kind of utilizing her power. Like, hey, I'm the first lady. There's certain things that I want to talk about, or certain things that I need to know or want to know at least. So I thought that was a cool little moment. Of course, they have the thing with their daughter and their son who left their daughter, and she ends up seeing her dad on TV and then freaks out because things got crazy with their dad, her mom and her dad. On TV, so they have just shuffling and all this craziness. So I'm not sure where they're gonna go with their son character. I don't mind him or anything. So I don't know. I'm not sure exactly where it's headed or anything like that. I don't really care too much about if they're gonna do a sort of typical teenage rebellion sort of thing. I'm not that interested in that, to be totally honest. Considering everything that's going on, I couldn't really care less unless we find out that he's like trying to sell drugs while still living in the White House. I don't know. Like, that would just be funny to me. Probably wouldn't be dramatic. I would think that's just funny and stupid. But unless some really big stuff starts happening with his character, I don't think I'm going to care about the little scenes with him. Admittedly, the scenes with the little girl, I don't really care too much for either, because it's like, oh, it's just the family thing. It's like things are crazy, and that's pretty much it. When they talk to the kids, it's like, oh, it's it's pretty weird. We're living in the White House and it's crazy, and that's pretty much it. So, I don't think it's bad or anything. I'm just like, I just kind of admittedly don't really care that much for it, because we got like all this other insanity with like everybody's dead and this dude's president. So when they go to like the kid stuff, which you can have in like pretty much any show, it doesn't have to be the dad, our dad just became president. In a ton of shows, it's like anything, we moved, like it's really crazy now and it's tough. So it's like a different situation, but it's the same sort of words, that sort of thing. So for me, it's just like, I don't really care too much for it, but I don't hate it. It doesn't like destroy the episode or anything. I'm just hoping that it doesn't get like super generic, where it's like the teenage, the son is just like, oh, he's just rebelling and stuff, and he's just a teenager. So hopefully it doesn't go that route. It kind of did a little, and that's why I was like, I hope it doesn't go further than that, because it already doesn't matter that much considering the main story of the series. But it is a family, so they do have to talk about that, like how that's affecting, how him being president now is affecting, the rest of them. So we'll see how it all plays out. But certainly enjoyed this episode. Crazy ending with someone surviving. I don't know if it's going to end up being the FBI agent's boyfriend or husband or whatever. But we'll see. We'll see how all that plays out. That would be very convenient, but it is television, so it's always convenient. It could be him. It could be just anyone random. It could even be a terrorist, now that I think about it. I didn't consider that when I was actually watching it. But that could be the case, too. So, I have to go into it. Like I said, you guys probably already saw it, but I have to get into it, and then I'm excited to see what happens in this next episode. But of course, I definitely want to know what you guys thought about this one. So please comment below. Let me know your favorite parts, your least favorite parts. And even though you may already know the answer, I do want to know what your speculation was when you first heard that there was a survivor. Did you think it was the FBI agent's boyfriend / husband, or whoever he's supposed to be? When I saw the picture, the guy looked a bit older, and I was like, maybe that's. I don't think he's that much older. He could just have gray hair, but. And I feel bad for thinking that, because I was like, maybe that's supposed to be her father, but I doubt that there's that big of a difference in age. I think he just had gray hair. But I don't know. It's kind of, like I said, it's TV, so it could easily be super convenient. But it could be a terrorist as well, or just a random person. Like any person, it would be an interesting story because they lived through such an insane situation. So it doesn't matter if it is just a person that's only going to be in this one episode or the next episode. It would still be entertaining. But like I said, I want to know who you initially thought it was when they first said, "Hey, there's a survivor over here." And of course, I want to know what you guys thought about this episode in general. So please comment below, let me know, and thanks for watching.